Welcome to this ACTFL webinar, Technology, Putting the Learner Out Front. My name is Paul Sandrock, Director of Education at the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL. This webinar introduces you to the three-part series available for purchase at our ACTFL website, www.actfl.org. In this overview webinar, the three presenters of our series each provide an overview to the key content from their individual full-hour webinars. Sharing ideas and examples in this webinar are Kevin Gogler, Associate Professor of Spanish at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York; Barbara Lindsay, currently teaching with the Instructional Technology Integration Certificate Program at the University of Maryland University College; and Bobby Hobgood, also currently teaching through the University of Maryland University College. Technology, as we know, is more and more available in our schools, our colleges, and universities, and certainly, as you can tell from this Google example, our students are plugged into many different devices. This graphic highlights some interesting and, in fact, very surprising facts about our students ages 13 to 24. Right in the middle, we see 92% engage with at least two devices simultaneously: TV, PC, smartphone, and/or their tablet. 45% use a smartphone to access online resources and content. 71% of our students search for information online after seeing a topic of interest on television. 74% are spending the same or more time going online via tablets compared to last year. And gaming is the #1 most popular content accessed online. So this webinar, with that scenario in mind, is intended to address two key questions. How can technology meaningfully engage and empower these learners to take responsibility for their learning? And how can we, as educators, make appropriate use of technology to enhance standards-based learning? The three full-hour webinars in this series will answer other questions which educators like you are asking yourselves. The questions form the titles of our three webinars, as you can see on this slide. And all of us as language educators are trying to figure out how best to use technology. Our presenters are going to provide you with ideas and strategies for ensuring that the learner is front and centered, engaged and empowered through technology. Again, the full series will be available for purchase at www.actfl.org. To begin, Kevin is going to share some guiding principles for using technology for language learning. As educators are asking themselves, I'm wired. Now what? What should I do with the technology or have that my students bring to the classroom? Please, Kevin, help us answer these questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm really happy to be talking about this topic because it's probably the most frequent question I get from folks who are interested in beginning to start to use technology in their classrooms. The district installs a smart board or has been given a cart of iPads, and now they don't know what to do with them. So it's often a real cart before the horse type of error that many school districts make. Is they get the money for the technology, and then what? Who's going to use it, and how is it going to be used? And so I was hoping to give a little bit of information about tips on how to get started and some concrete examples that one can do in their classroom to get started. So I would say rule number one in terms of getting started once you're wired, once you have some technology in the classroom that's connected to the internet, would be to choose one assignment that you do for an extended period of time. I think when you're getting started, it's really hard to just pick this kind of short-lived type of assignment that may only happen during one class session or two class sessions. It's hard to perfect your method, to kind of be reflective in your teaching practices. And I feel that this is a mistake that a lot of beginners make, is that they feel they have to start very, very small with one class session. And that one class session is probably not very, it probably doesn't go very well. And so they get discouraged and don't return back to it. So instead of doing that, I find from my experience, integration of technology with my class goes better if I choose one thing that I do over and over again with my students so that they get comfortable with the routine, they see the grand design of the course, they have a pattern that they follow, so that it almost becomes automatic to them that every Thursday they know they do X. Or right after an exam, we know we have to hand in Y. This also, by extending the time period of a particular assignment and being repetitive, allows the instructor to be reflective on what's going well, what's going not so well, to really give time for the students to give feedback, and to kind of adjust the assignment accordingly so that by the time the students are assessed, whether it's a low-stakes type of assessment or a high-stakes type of assessment, I would recommend a low-stakes type of assessment for your first assignment. But before these students are assessed, they have time to give feedback to the instructor, and the instructor can adjust the assignment to kind of lower the anxiety of students, maybe make the assignment more reasonable. Perhaps it was unreasonable in the beginning based on the limitations of the technology or the limitations of the knowledge of the students or connectivity. It really is important to make those adjustments. Then the next time you do it, you can try a new assignment or make adjustments to the one that you tried the first time. But I think it's important to have that repetitive type of assignment for an extended period of time. The other kind of advice I would give in terms of starting is to rethink everything you do in the classroom from the ground up. When you integrate technology, I think a major error that most folks make is they think they can just do what they were doing before with the students, except now it's a little bit slicker. It's a little bit more fun. There's a few more bells and whistles because we're using the technology. That usually ends in an unsuccessful implementation of the technology. This is a photograph that I took of my son when we went to Paris a few years ago, and they had a carnival right outside the Louvre. And you could, for about €5, you could go inside this bubble, this air bubble, and move around in the water. And so at first, my son tried to swim, and that didn't work because he's in an air bubble. And then he tried to walk on water, and that didn't work. So he had to rethink everything. So he started to jump up and down inside the bubble and found that this experience was much more fun and much more enriching if he just jumped around in the bubble and tried to see if he could, float in the air in a sense on water. And so I think that has to happen in the classroom as well. You have this new technology. You have to rethink everything in terms of maybe the spatial configuration of your room, perhaps when homework is turned in or what is even defined as homework. You'll have to rethink your assessment methods. You might have to rethink what is acceptable or not acceptable. Without rethinking fundamentally what we do, usually it doesn't turn out so well. That kind of fundamental redesign is key. So let me give you an example, one example of a reoccurring assignment that I've used. I'll actually give you a few examples in this talk. One is hyper collaboration. So instead of saying, boy, I'd really like to use my iPads or I'd really like to use my smartphone, I would say start with, I'd really like my students to collaborate more in writing and to learn to become better writers, to develop their grammar by becoming peer editors and help each other. So one thing you can do, one assignment I've done, is I've had my students during the entire semester or entire year create their own mini Wikipedia on a particular topic. They research the topics, they post them, they edit each other's work to polish the expression, and it's been quite successful in terms of what they choose to write about and the type of body of knowledge they grow throughout the semester on a particular topic. You can see my example at civwiki.wikifoundry.com, and I also have detailed instructions that I provided to the students on how to do that. So that'll help you get started with an example. I've also had students create their own radio talk shows. So they have to decide on what the episodes are about. We can, very similar to a webinar that we're having now, the students, in a sense, host a public webinar, and they come up with the questions, the topics, and they have discussions about them. Again, it's not a one-time assignment. It's something that would reoccur maybe every month. So part of the assignment would be preparing for it, then thinking about all the issues around it that they might have to be concerned about. The first one might not go very well, but by the time they do the last one, it goes quite smoothly because they know the routine. Another assignment that I've used that works quite well is just in-class writing using a tool called sync.in. And the students can write short stories, they write fairy tales together, and just watching them collaborate and negotiate grammar together is a very helpful exercise. And so you might do that as almost a warm-up exercise in a particular class, where the students come in and they know the first 5 or 10 minutes of class is just free writing, but collaborative free writing. That's very easy to implement using that tool, sync.in, and it's a free tool as well. Some additional strategies, again, these are not technologies. They are strategies that are enhanced by technology. Besides hyper-collaboration, I like to work with personal learning portfolios. I like to work with virtual travel using Google Maps, for example, or Google Earth. I like to work with data in terms of understanding culture through numbers and data and kind of processing that and maybe having students create infographics. That phenomenon I like to refer to as culturomics. And also digital storytelling can be a very powerful strategy enhanced by technology. And so that is a brief overview of kind of a way to begin and some examples on how to get started once you're wired.
Kevin, thank you so much. It makes so much sense to focus on the task and not to be obsessed with the tools that are just meant to accomplish that task, and really to come up with some very engaging strategies that are going to make the learning more effective, more efficient, more engaging. So thank you very much. Next, Barbara Lindsay is ready to guide us through the feeling of being overwhelmed by all of those online resources available to us as language educators. How can we possibly sort through all of these options and make smart choices that are appropriate for our language students as well as supporting our learning goals? Barbara, please give us your advice when we have too many choices.
All right, Paul. Thank you so much. As an introduction to this webinar, let's take a look at the role of online resources in our daily lives and how these resources, carefully chosen, can be used to engage our students in authentic and meaningful language learning experiences. If we take a look at this slide here that shows a bunch of Web 2.0 tools that are now available, you can see that there is an abundance of online resources that our students and we now have access to. They play an increasingly important role in our daily lives. For example, these resources shown here for El Mundo, such as Twitter, Facebook, and Google+, inform our media. They also are being used now to empower individuals and groups to improve the quality of their lives, such as Google Mapmaker here, that's being used by second and third world communities to map their local areas with key locations and information. And they can provide our students and us with unprecedented access to the products, practices, and perspectives of the cultures of the languages we teach. Here you see an example of a free online resource called Storify, which has been used in this instance to collect international perspectives 1 year later of the March 11th, 2011 Japanese earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown. These online resources also give us the opportunity to connect our students with other language learners and speakers of the languages they are learning. So in our webinar, we're going to take a look at some examples of projects that you can use with your students that are authentic, meaningful, and here is an example of one of my favorite projects. It's called the Lunchbox Project. And the reason I love this resource and think it's so wonderful is because it was created by a Chinese language teacher using freely available online resources that are easy to use. It can be used with a range of language learners from elementary to high school and from novice to intermediate proficiency levels. Now, if we take a closer look at this particular project and we evaluate it through the lens of the National Standards for Learning Languages, which is what we'll be doing in this webinar, we can identify several standards that we may otherwise find challenging to incorporate into our curriculum. For example, students can view the different foods children around the world eat for lunch, who prepares them, how they're presented. Here you actually see in the slide down below, you see that students are using actual cutlery, not plastic knives and forks, for example. And you can see the role lunch plays in students' lives by using this particular project. So this would address the Comparisons Standard 4.2. Students demonstrate understanding of the concept of culture through comparisons of the cultures studied and their own. Taking a look at the map on the right, you can see that multiple classes across the world are participating, thus addressing the Connections Standard 3.2. Students acquire information and recognize the distinctive viewpoints that are only available through the foreign language and its cultures. And by sharing their lunch experiences online to a global audience, we meet the community's standard 5.1. Students use the language both within and beyond the school setting. Further using the ACTFL standards, we can identify two communication modes this project supports. Communication Standard 1.2. Students understand and interpret written and spoken language on a variety of topics. And Communication Standard 1.3. Students present information, concepts, and ideas to an audience of listeners or readers on a variety of subjects. So in this webinar, we'll take a look at how we can use freely available online tools, such as those found in Google Drive, for example, so that we can easily collaborate on and share resources with our peers, whether they are in our school, our district, or around the globe. It can be overwhelming, but we can use key online applications and our profession's guiding documents to help us. In this webinar, we'll learn how to find, filter, and evaluate online resources and projects that address all language levels and that reflect the National Standards for Learning Languages and the 21st Century Skills Map for World Languages.
Well, thanks, Barbara. I appreciated so much your Lunchbox example. It's clearly a way that we can see how we can link to our national standards, and not just communication and cultures, but also connections, comparisons, and communities. I think we are all saying, I can do this. Our final presenter is Bobby Hobgood. Bobby has been facilitating language learning in a variety of online formats, both synchronous and asynchronous. He has been exploring how to empower our language learners and not feel stymied because we as educators can't possibly know everything. Bobby, thanks for sharing your thoughts and ideas on using technology.
Well, let me say thank you to you, or in the spirit of things, merci beaucoup, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon to talk about a topic that's very dear to me. You know, our classrooms are more diverse than ever. Almost everyone is seeing a dramatic change in student demographics. And each group of students represents not only a unique combination of learners, but it also reminds us of the instructional pluralism and the challenges of teaching in an American classroom. To illustrate what I mean, if you've ever taught two or more sections of the same class in a given day, you can probably share countless stories of the differences between your first period class and, let's say, your fourth period class. At the same time, there's tremendous diversity with respect to the resources our students access for language learning. So how do I handle this diversity of learning styles, diversity of content, and diversity of background? And if you aren't feeling challenged enough by this diversity, let's enhance the mix with the reminder that our educational landscape is also colored by living in a knowledge-based economy, an information age, and a global age. We see the influence of this through the increase in one-to-one computing environments, through blended learning programs, increases in online learning from elementary school through post-secondary education. For example, in the K-12 arena, the report From Chalkboard to Tablets, the digital conversion of the K-12 classroom, that was published by the organization Project Tomorrow, we've seen a dramatic increase in technology integration and access on many levels. Teachers are recognizing opportunities to capitalize on access to global information via the internet. One such finding from that report indicated that of those surveyed, and there were more than 360,000 respondents, 45% of them noted that in 2012, they were creating more interactive lessons because of having access to technology. And that represents a 25% increase in just the past 2 years. So if you spend any time thinking about the levels of diversity in your classroom and the wealth of information accessible via the World Wide Web, you'll find yourself overwhelmed with the question of how to address these challenges, and that is how to do so without abusing substances, without abusing students or your significant other. So the reality is you can't possibly know everything, and frankly, that isn't your role as an educator. Long gone are the days when teachers were expected to be the purveyors of knowledge on all topics at all the time. We're no longer the power brokers or the knowledge brokers that once characterized the world languages classroom. For instance, I often challenge my students who are world language teachers to think critically about what they teach on the first day of class in their level 1 classes. The rhetorical yet relevant question I pose to them is, what do you do when, having introduced basic greetings in your class on the first day, and you realize that most of the students already know from accessing the web the content that you're offering on the first day of class? And so that the realization that the world languages classroom is much bigger than the physical space that's inhabited by you and your students, that becomes an essential consideration when we plan for instruction. So whether you're a native speaker or not, you can't possibly know all of the aspects of the language you teach. And incidentally, ACTFL, the U.S. Department of Ed, your district, your school, they're not going to call the pedagogy police on you if you tell a student, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. So as you've no doubt heard many times in presentations like this, when we can no longer be the sage on the stage, if we aspire to prepare students for their future, a future that we can't possibly know today, given the rapid rate of technological change, then we have to prepare students to become self-directed learners. And this means a shifting of the onus to the learner to take on greater responsibility for their learning. In essence, we must empower students to take control of their learning. Now, by empowerment here, I'm not talking about engagement. As world language teachers, I think I'm safe in saying that we know how to engage our students. Instead, I'm talking about building a climate that takes students beyond engagement and into the ownership of the processes, the practices, and decisions that help them to develop proficiency in the target language. So based on my experience as an online instructor in K-12 and higher ed, my work as a former high school French teacher, my work in professional development and technology integration, I'm going to be sharing my insights and research into the key elements for empowering our world language students. Now, as a reminder, the title of this series is Technology, Putting the Learner Out Front. And a key message inherent in the title is the understanding that technology is not the focus of why we devote so much attention to the implementation of one-to-one initiatives, iPad projects, or bring your own device policies. What we're talking about here, and specifically related to the concept of student empowerment for their own learning, is the perspective of technology as a tool, as a catalyst for enhancing and extending learning. So during the full session, I'll give additional insight into how you can gauge the potential impact of your decisions for integrating technology into a given lesson. Let's take a look at 3 key elements that we'll explore in the full session, but I want to touch upon today for empowering your students. Now, when we talk about empowering students, we're talking about the gradual transition of responsibility for learning that leads to learner autonomy. So to be clear, in this context, learner autonomy does not mean a student who does not need the teacher, but specifically a student that constructs knowledge from direct experience, rather than one who responds to your instruction. During the full webinar, we're going to take a look at the concept of autonomous learning and the characteristics of an autonomous learner, and what do good language learners do on their own to develop proficiency. Of course, another key element in empowering students to take control of their learning is manifested in how we integrate technology as well as the overall instruction as digitally literate language teachers. So as a reminder, the title of this series is Technology Putting the Learner Out Front. And a key message is understanding that the focus of why we devote so much attention to the implementation of one-to-one initiatives and so on is not about the tool, but it's about the learner, and it's about the skills that they need in the future to be digitally literate and to be those 21st century citizens that we often talk about. Finally, we'll take a look at how we can leverage the instructional design of our lessons and resources to empower learners. We'll examine some common areas of instruction like resources, the physical environment, teacher and student roles, assessment, and the curriculum itself as opportunities to rethink and reshape our efforts to empower all learners. I want to give you one concrete example that looks like this one here to empower your students. Here you're looking at a sample of what I think of as an empowerment tool, and I use this in my online courses, a group agreement to be completed by members of a collaborative learning group as they prepare for a major project during the semester. You'll notice here that the prompts direct the students to make decisions about how they'll work together to accomplish a particular task. And it includes prompts that help the learners to develop a schedule for their work, as well as some guidelines for effective collaboration. So even if you don't know everything about the target language and the cultures you teach, you don't know every teaching strategy, and you don't have the latest and greatest technologies available to you, I hope this teaser has enticed you to join us to further your understanding of how to empower learners to take control of their own learning, and how to leverage technology to ensure that you're putting the learner out front.
Thank you very much, Bobby. And I know every participant is thinking this is something they can do, and it's such an important concept, getting our learners to take responsibility for their language learning. And I'm going to end this conversation by asking each of our presenters one final question. If there is one thing that language educators should keep in mind when using technology in their teaching, what would be your advice? And ask Kevin to start.
Great, thank you, Paul. I would say almost in a sense repeat a little bit of what I was saying earlier. I think a big I don't know if we want to say a misstep, I should say, that most folks have is they want to use a particular technology. I hear from faculty all the time, I just want to use my smart board, or how do I use an iPad, or even school boards who make the argument that we need to integrate iPads into education. There's no silver bullet in terms of any particular technology that's going to transform your teaching. You are going to transform your teaching, and the technology can certainly help enhance that. But the better way to think about it is certainly to think about what are the things I want my students to be able to do, and then start looking and asking around about how technology might help you enhance that difference. Most of the time, faculty get overwhelmed because, as the other presenters so clearly stated, there's just so much, and so either folks do nothing, they just throw up their hands and say, "I'll leave it for the next generation," or they try to do too much, and so it becomes confusing for the students on where they're supposed to go and how they're supposed to do the assignment. So usually what I tell, what I have done for years now and what I tell others to do is to try the 10% method. Change 10% of what you do enhanced by technology each year. And then at the end of 5 years, half of what you do will be transformed. And every decade, your pedagogy should look very little like it did 10 years prior. And if we all kind of followed that rule, then our classrooms would be fresh and innovative and certainly meet the needs of the 21st century.
Thank you, Kevin. Barbara, advice, please.
I think I'd follow up on what Kevin said and talking about looking at technology as a tool and not as the goal. And think about really why are you using a particular technology? Think about how will it support your learning goals for your students. For example, what ways does the technology you want to use address the 5 C's of our national standards, especially the more difficult ones teachers have to realize, such as communities and connections? How can it develop our 21st century skills for our students? And lastly, how does it provide students opportunities to engage in meaningful real-world tasks? This is something that technology can afford us the opportunity to do with our students, as opposed to what we've been able to do in the past. So again, as Kevin said, piggybacking off of that, technology is a tool. The idea, the focus should be on your pedagogy first and foremost, and then having the technology support your pedagogy.
Thank you. And Bobby, you have the last word on this question.
Paul, I'm reminded of the slide you showed initially from Google that gave us some insight into the numbers of young people who are using various technologies and in various ways. And it brings to mind the concept of the digital divide, which unfortunately still permeates our educational landscape today. And simply put, the digital divide represents that gap between our students who have broadband access, who have access to maybe a smartphone, who have computers at home, versus those students who don't have those technologies. And so we have to keep in mind that while there is a lot of focus and attention now given to the concept of the digital native, i.e. the young person who has grown up knowing technology, we should be very careful about assumptions made that all of these students have the same level of access, and further, even if they have access, we need to be careful about assumptions we make about how they are using those technologies. While we might see a student sitting at a laptop on Facebook, working in a word processor, listening to music all at the same time, we might assume that they're adept at using those technologies, but in reality, they're simply using them. So my advice would be, to the teacher would be to first think about what do you know about your learners. Do you know, for instance, or what would you do if you knew that the majority of your students on a regular basis listen to foreign radio or foreign television stations via the internet? How would that impact your teaching? So it's very important for us today to think very critically about our learners in the classroom and to know them in terms of their technology use and integration beyond what we can visibly see with our eyes.
Thank you so much, and I am so appreciative of the expertise and experiences shared today by our presenters, Kevin Gogler of Marist College, Barbara Lindsay and Bobby Hobgood, both currently with the University of Maryland University College. If you would like to learn more ideas on specific strategies for using technology to put the learner out front, sign up for the 3 webinars in this series at www.actful.org. I'm Paul Sandrock, ACTFL Director of Education, and I thank you for learning today with ACTFL, your provider of high-quality professional development focused on today's most essential issues. Thank you.